Hello, everyone, and welcome to Bishop Talk. We are glad that you have taken time out of your schedule to join us for this next episode of an ongoing list of episodes we've been doing on Bishop Talk. I invite you to, if you want to watch more episodes and find out what conversations we've been having, to please visit sunshinecathedral.org. Click on my Bishop page, and on the left-hand side there, you will see a long list of Bishop Talk series that we've been having. But what brings us together today is a unique conversation that we're looking forward to having. And that conversation centers around looking and talking with someone from Africa, specifically about the flight that brought 49 individuals from Africa to America, and kind of the intent and impact around that. And here to talk to us a little bit today about some of these concerns is Louis Van der Wright. Did I get that right?
Yes, that's correct. Thank
Okay,
you.
great. So, Luis, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and just give a little bit of background context of who you are and social location, and before we get into our conversation today.
Great. Thanks, Robert. And hi to everyone that's listening or watching. It's lovely to be together and to have a conversation on this really important global topic, also from the context where I find myself. So I'm located in Cape Town, South Africa. And actually, as we are recording this this episode at this very moment, our president is in conversation with President Trump and a delegation from South Africa discussing the relations. So I'm quite curious to see what's going to come from that. So such a topical conversation, and clearly from what we've seen in the media, that this is an important conversation for our two countries, but also definitely globally. So I find myself in standing sort of between three different worlds. The one that I'm primarily working in is for a nonprofit called Inclusive and Affirming Ministries, and has been doing work around faith, sexuality, and gender on the African continent for the last 3 decades. So this year we're celebrating our 30th year, doing this important work of creating more inclusion and working against religious-based homophobia, transphobia, biphobia on the continent, which is sadly only increasing um, uh, as we see in the last couple of months and years. But apart from that, I'm ordained in the Dutch Reformed Church. The Dutch Reformed Church has a very unique history in South Africa, so hopefully we can dive into that in the conversation. Um, and still involved quite a lot in doing the work of racial justice and gender justice in that context. And then I'm also a bit connected to academia and research, which is so important for ongoing work, and that work also trickles down, or not trickles down, but that is done in context, that it's informed, that it's embedded also in the work on the ground. So I'm really privileged to be sort of involved in those different sectors of society.
Excellent. Well, thank you for taking time to be with us today. And also, we're joined by co-host Bishop Durrell Watkins, who's the senior minister of Sunshine Cathedral. And Bishop Watkins, do you want to say anything more before we dive into the dialogue here? Self-introduction time.
Oh, yeah, I'm Durrell. I'm Robert's husband, and I'm the senior minister at Sunshine Cathedral. No, I'm ready to ask some questions.
Well, why don't you just go right forward? I think we're all set in prime. We This is going to be a very interesting conversation. Again, thank you for joining us today. Darrell, I'm going to let you have the first question.
Okay, because I got a few. I got a few because you're an activist, you're an administrator, uh, you're a scholar, but in all of that, you're also a systematic theologian. Is that right?
Yes.
Yes. And so I asked very similar question of Kwok Kwilan when we were talking to her when I get theologians. This question I have to ask is the work that you're doing, and I don't know what vocabulary you use for it. I mean, I know that we all have our different ways of speaking about what is ultimate and whatever, but where is, for shorthand, I'll say God. Where is God in the work that you do? Is God sort of just what you get around to when you're done with your work? That's a personal thing, or is God a motivating factor for what you do?
Sure, that is a great question. um, yeah, no, it's so expansive to me. I think language around God and who God is and how God is present is definitely difficult, especially if English is not your first language. Um, but I mean, my understanding of divinity, it's always it's mystery, and it's revealed mystery. It's mystery that is revealed in often in those moments that you can't comprehend it or that you don't expect it. So I see all of the work that I do is really in conversation with that which is the divine mystery around us and in us. I find a lot of spiritual value in understanding embodiment by nature also of the work that we do. That faith is absolutely an embodied thing. That salvation is something that has to do with our bodies and the body of Christ, and all of the metaphors that we have in our faith to understand the actual divinity of being human. So doing work that relates to our embodiment around gender and sexuality and race is really to go into that created nature, that creation of God, discovering its mystery, discovering its complexity, and finding ways really to turn back to the goodness of creation. And maybe just one last thing. I think we've just had a conference the last 2 days on the Nicene Creed, reflecting this year the 1,700 years. Globally, there's quite a lot of celebrations this year reflecting on the Nicene Creed, asking questions of, what does the Orthodox faith have to do and tradition have to do with current issues? And there were so many rich things that came from that conversation. One of them being this connection between understanding the connection between the creation and salvation. And so that's a whole world that needs to continually be discovered and be surprised by. Yeah.
Wow. Thank you.
Well, I want you dived into the Dutch Reformed side just a little bit. So uh, take us down that path, the Dutch Reform in Africa, and how that fits in your spiritual journey and your life, and how is the Dutch Reform seen today, maybe in Africa?
Yes, obviously it's a very long, complex history that we can't go through. But the short of it, to understand a bit of the context, is that when the Dutch first came to South Africa in 1652, they came with their faith and planted the church also that is today known as the Dutch Reformed Church. So actually, the very congregation where I serve at was the first church also in South Africa called Grote Kerk, or the main church here in Cape Town. And went through a lot of different periods, but especially during apartheid, the Dutch Reformed Church, it was never a state church, but it was sometimes I refer to it as the government in prayer. It's right opposite our Parliament building in Cape Town, our church building, and so there was this close relationship between the formation that happened in faith spaces and what was happening politically. And a lot of the laws that were passed also during apartheid were either supported or birthed or encouraged by the Dutch Reformed Church. Obviously, the last 30 years, things have changed quite a lot, even though the struggle around whiteness and reconciliation and justice is, I mean, very far from being what we hoped it would be when South Africa came out of apartheid. But so the church has completely lost any sort of political power that it used to be. So it completely almost became disconnected in some sense from political life. But that has given us, I think, a chance to really redefine ourselves and also try and identify. So another important thing, I mean, I'm Afrikaans, and the Dutch Reformed Church is primarily Afrikaans church, very ethnically sort of bound around that. And so there's a really ongoing deep conversation also at the moment between what it means to be Afrikaans, and Afrikaner, and be a person of faith. And there's quite I would say, a gap between the group of Afrikaners that, for instance, now were that went as refugees, as so-called refugees to the States, and I think where the dominant discourse is, at least in the Dutch Reformed Church.
Do you think? Go ahead.
Do you find that being less connected to government allows you to be more prophetic? Are you able to try things, say things, reach out in ways that you may not have felt you were able to before? Is it freeing to not be so tied to government?
I think so, definitely. I mean, I wouldn't say that we fulfill a prophetic role as we should, especially because our church structure is not very hierarchical. So we don't function like the Anglican or the Methodist Church, where the bishop or the archbishop would have sort of that role almost. They don't see themselves as the head of the church, really. So it's a very locally based church. So there's a lot of diversity within the Dutch Reformed Church, but we do have a lot of faith leaders that are part of the denomination that do speak out, and that so I would say public theology is quite an important part of the formation, at least in the last 20 years or so in the Dutch Reformed Church.
So let's go back to that wonderful 49, as I call them, that the flight from Africa to America. And there's a lot of things that have been said around stuff since that the flight has landed. They're fleeing genocide, they're fleeing oppression, they're fleeing lots of things that that if any intelligent person were to be informed about what Africa is today, especially in Cape Town, those things are not true. And I'm greatly aware of the as I said earlier, the intent, impact, the actions of them leaving, the impact of it on America, and also vice versa. And as you said earlier, both of our country leaders are meeting as we speak, obviously. But give us one of the lenses that you wish to look through to talk about the flight that left, and the individuals and what the makeup of that group of people that really was basically fast-tracked here in America as a refugee.
Yes, I mean, I think, just put quite simply, is this is all about politics, global politics. So it's really to me, it's really sad that you can almost see this group of people as being victims, not in the real sense of being victims of genocide or persecution or any sort of refugee status in South Africa, but was victims of this global political system and where we find ourselves. And it has a lot to do with South Africa's relations with globally, and it's complex, between like Russia and Israel and Palestine, and taking, South Africa going to the International Criminal Court. So all of that plays, I think it's a really important part of the discourse. And then the other thing that I think is necessary to say is that there's no denying that some of these people that left were genuine victims. Some of them have lost family members to farm murders. So it's not that farm murders are not happening. It's just understanding that within the context of South Africa. And it's also not useful to try and play sort of oppression Olympics. But it is necessary to say that South Africa is a deeply violent country, traumatized country, and there's a lot of violence happening still. There's a lot of there's so much inequality and a lot of crime, and so there are populations and groups that are much more vulnerable than white Afrikaans farmers. But it doesn't mean that these people don't probably legitimately feel unsafe in the country, or feel that there's a better place for them to live. And maybe just one more thing is to say that I also see this as a symptom as white South Africans not necessarily knowing how to belong and to actually that saying is, when you're used to privilege, then equality feels like oppression.
Mm.
And so there's this thing of not having bought into the country, and not really buying into giving yourself to make this place better. And so when you feel that life is tough, but you've always had it, quite good, then that reality it's difficult to deal with.
Mm.
It looks from our end, because we don't know, we're on the ground there, we don't know all the day-to-day stuff, but we do know that the current U.S. administration has been very unwelcoming and very unconcerned about people who are fleeing for their lives from war-torn areas and famine and places where their very identity is criminalized, and they're just trying to stay out of jail or prison, or trying to avoid execution. And that has had received very little sympathy from this administration. And of course, all of those people are queer or brown or black, or or sex workers or trans, and couldn't care less. And then suddenly, here are a handful of people of European descent, and they just and it's a big crisis. Well, we got to get them right in. And from our perspective, without knowing all the details, without knowing really much of anything, the appearance is very racist. And so that's a lot of the discomfort on our end of things, is that we almost forget that these are people who might actually have issues. Well, because what we see is, oh, here's this racist administration doing another racist thing.
Mm.
So I'm glad you have contextualized it a bit, so we don't forget that these are actually people also.
Mm.
But it is inconsistent that if we had cared about everyone before now, this would just be one more group we care about, and it would feel differently, I think, on our end.
Absolutely.
What's your I mean, again, what was your initial reaction when you heard that this is happening? The 49 together, and this is the part we don't know. What was the lead up to these 49 being selected? What was the lead up to this particular group getting on the plane? What was your initial reaction to when this kind of all started coming out and coming together? What was some of your initial thoughts around that?
Well, disbelief, but then again, the last couple of months, you really have to, if there's been so many things hitting the news that you just that you don't understand, especially coming from the Trump administration, that I actually didn't believe it at first. But then quickly, so around February, we realized that, this is a really important public conversation. And I was part of a group also, with some initial conversations. And I'm wondering if you've seen that statement by a group of white South African Christian leaders that found that, this is a really important time to raise, especially a Christian voice in opposition to what's happening, and to call that out, and to call white people to account, to take responsibility also, and to call out the white racism when we see it, and invite people to do the hard work and the really enriching and life-giving work of building a better South Africa, which there is such a long history of, and there's such a much more beautiful alternative that people can be invited to. So on the one hand, this makes global news, but it's almost distracting because it's taking away from the real work that's happening on the ground, and the many, many beautiful things that are happening, and the stories of hope and reconciliation, justice that are there. It's not all downhill, and it's not all terrible.
Yeah. Was that highly? I mean, I've read the statement that you referenced from the clergy that came together. Was that kind of a highly unusual move for them to come together to make that statement, or was that we have to? It was we need to make a statement. We need to do this, and we need to denounce this and call this out. Was that kind of a natural thing that kind of happened, or were clergy or churches like we need to make this stance?
Yeah, that is a complex question. It really depends on who you're speaking to. I think this goes back to the prophetic voice of the church, and obviously during apartheid, the church was the prophetic voice. People like Archbishop Desmond Tutu leading the anti-apartheid struggle. Many theologians, Alan Busak, and the list goes on of those that were leading the anti-apartheid struggle were from the church. So, and as we are a deeply Christian country also. But somehow the prophetic voice and some of the ecumenical movement post-apartheid in South Africa has not been what it was. It has been revived quite a bit, especially around some of our political developments with our previous president. But I think it is also difficult, deciding on what you want to call this thing. How should it operate? In the past, there were things like the Kairos statement or the Balha Confession were very particular types of theological documents that were issued to speak out to what was happening. And so there was some discussion about, what type of document should this be? How broad should it be? Because we really wanted, I think the thing is that you had to find the biggest middle ground for things that people could agree on, because the political spectrum is wide, but there were certain few issues that we felt, at least on this, we can find middle ground. We can call out false, fake or lies that are being propagated, for instance, and this common calling that we have to build a better South Africa.
My sense is that the spirit of Desmond Tutu, Bishop Desmond Tutu, is still alive, and a lot of the work that still happens there. And I know that you met Bishop Tutu. And what would you say that what would you say that most influenced you about your meeting with Bishop Tutu? And what would you say Bishop Tutu might say about what's happening right now?
Oh.
Okay, that was the curveball. Sorry.
Yeah. I think there's a lot to say. So I was privileged to meet Archbishop Tutu on a few occasions, and I remember the one time I was part of a youth leadership program that spent time with him, and when we left, he said, his words were, "Make this country beautiful, especially for the poor." And that just always stayed with me. So I mean, I think he absolutely embodied understanding of looking at all people as God's creation. And there's this really well-known quote also that we often use in our workshops, that he wrote, that the evil of apartheid was that it made children of God doubt that they are children of God. And if the church continues to do that, also then around issues like sexuality and gender, then we've committed the ultimate blasphemy. And so, I mean, someone like Tutu would always side with those that are the most suffering, most downtrodden, most hurting. And I think that's where his focus was always. And so I think I just want to say one thing more about this focus on white people and whiteness. And I mean, to put it in context, also the white population in South Africa is 8% of the population. We're really a small minority, but we take up way too much space. And there's sort of a paradox in that, I think, because I think, this focus on whiteness as opposed to Black liberation or other things that you can focus on. I think most white people haven't understood their whiteness well enough in relation to the country that we live in. And so I often, I think what we struggle with in South Africa are actually white prophetic voices that have done the difficult work of understanding and interrogating their whiteness and their racialization and understanding what it means to be white. Because it's definitely not the time for white people to try and regain some power and, take the, lead from the front. There's a certain humility and self-sacrifice and introspection that's needed. And we're seeing more of that coming from the white community also.
Mm.
How much do you think, because we are religious people and we want to use religion in healing ways, but also religion has been used in abusive ways. And so how much of not only racism, but homophobia and transphobia and just all of it always hurts me that some of the ugliest, least generous, most hurtful attitudes and rhetoric come out of the church or use the church scriptures or documents or history or language in weaponized ways. So is it the same there as it would be here that the thing we use, the tools we have to help have also been used to hurt, and it makes things very, very complicated?
Yes, absolutely. I think the intersections help a lot. And so understanding, for instance, especially around the Bible, because the conversation, for instance, around sexuality always comes back to, or starts with, what is the Bible say? What is the biblical witness? And that really is a question about hermeneutics and how you read the Bible, how you interpret the Bible. And in South Africa, we've learned, really hard lessons around what unhealthy, or there's many ways to describe it, ignorant, unhelpful, lazy hermeneutics can do when it's put into power around apartheid, because the Bible was a site of struggle. The Bible was used to justify apartheid. And so sometimes, but not always, that does give people a bit of more humility in asking questions about how the Bible is used to exclude or to oppress. And so that's really a strong point to draw from in the South African context. And then, so that's just one thing. There's more things I could say, but.
What would you say at this point, given how some things have kind of transpired here, would be some lessons learned already from this recent transition of folks from Africa to America? Are there any immediate lessons learned, or is there anything that immediately pops up to say, hey, we really need to rethink what this looks like, or we need to put more attention in this area? Is there anything that kind of just jumps out at you right now to say, look, people, this is our calling, and these are the things that we need to reaffirm in our belief system and our values and what's important. We had Troy Perry, who's the former moderator and the founder of the Metropolitan Community Churches, has this thing he often said. He said, I always keep the main thing the main thing. So I guess for you, what would be the main thing for people to focus on right now?
Yeah, I think that is usually a very contextual question. But I think nationally in South Africa, there has been also a bit of a revivement of the ecumenical movement. And, there's also been, what South Africa is also very good with is using humor to make sense, or actually, because life is always dramatic in South Africa. Always some crisis. It always feels like we're at the brink of things that are going to collapse. So I think there's actually, and that's actually allowed, I think, a bit of mutuality and bridge building, and not that we have a new common enemy, but there is like a sense of like, okay, we're all in this together now. We're not going to let global politics write our narrative. We have to work harder to write our own narrative. We're not going to let that be dictated by the media or or by someone else, and especially not the Trump administration. So, but it in terms of what's becoming clearer or lessons learned, I think it's still quite early days. I'm part of so I can't really speak for other contexts, but I'm part of a group within the Dutch Reformed Church that has really grappled and taken this very issue very seriously. Had a lot of meetings with our General Synod about how are we going to write this more beautiful, write a better story for people to believe in, and that involves, a bit of social media campaigning, writing a sermons series, helping people with the tools of faith that are politically polarized, or that that easily believe what they read in the media, to just from the position of faith to reaffirm the core things of justice and reconciliation and peace. All of this was this task team called the Task Team for Justice and Reconciliation, but it's focused on no, I think it's Micah, is that right in English? Micah 6 verse 8. What does the Lord call you but to do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God? And so we're sort of using that as the fundamental text to say, let's return to this work. This is the fundamental work that we are called to do.
I have a question about colonization. It is my observation. See, I just don't know very much about Reformed traditions. I mean, even though I went to school with a lot of Presbyterians, and I just don't know a lot about it. That's just my experience. But but in like the Anglican tradition, places that were colonized by the Church of England and that government, they imposed Victorian era Anglicanism on them, and then at some point left. And these are very conservative countries now. But it's the faith that was imposed on them. Now, meanwhile, in the West, the faith has evolved, and we think of these people as being mean or angry or unkind or whatever. But it is the exact faith that was imposed on them, and so that's my observation with Anglican countries that had been colonized. Is that anywhere similar to the Dutch Reformed presence in South Africa? Did they bring 17th century values that never changed, or has it been very active and evolving within South Africa?
Yeah, so that is a complex history. I mean, as we see it in obviously many of the partner organizations we work with in our neighboring countries. The laws and things were formed, the so-called sodomy laws and things were formed through the Christian influence during colonization. And so there is this rhetoric that, being homosexual is un-African, that it's a thing imported from the West. But homophobia is actually the thing that was imported into Africa. There's so much evidence to show that, pre-colonial Africa had a much more broader understanding of gender and sexuality before that influence came into the continent. So that's a really a sad part of history. And so we work quite hard to dispel that narrative and to but it is quite difficult when faith is misused in that way. But yeah, I mean, I think in terms of South Africa, because it was never just, there was this fight for power between the Dutch and the English, and it's a bit more of a complex history. Also, much more ecumenically rich than other African countries. So you have strong Anglican presence here. You have Methodism. You have strong Reformed tradition. Quite a big Catholic church, but then also the majority actually of Christians don't belong to these mainline churches. They belong to so-called African independent churches, which also mixes in a lot of African traditional beliefs. So that also brings a lot of cultural elements into the mix. So that it really is a mixing pot of influences and histories. Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you for taking your time to be with us for this one, this episode, and I'm sure it will not be the last, Louis. So
Mm,
I hope you'll come back to continue the conversation with us at another point in the future because I think this is one of those social, political, global moments in time that I think we need to be in conversation about,
mm,
and we can think of any way better to do it than people who are literally there on the ground. And you know, being very aware that American politics, just all politics, are influencing everyone today, from Russia to Ukraine to Africa to America. Uh, it just a lot of things are happening around the globe, and I think one of the ways that we can help deal with those boiling pressure points is to bring people together to talk about them. So, I
absolutely.
want to thank you for your time. So, as we wrap up, I'm going to
Mm.
give you the final word and the final thought that you would like for our listeners to hear from you for this episode. So, you have the final word.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to the two of you and to everyone who supports this ministry and that makes this possible. I think, as you mentioned, dialogue is so important. Staying in the conversation, especially sometimes with those that you wouldn't normally be in conversation with. Um, so I think the the time that we are living in wants to polarize us and wants to put us in encampments and especially those even fighting, standing for justice. I think I recognize it in myself. The temptation in there is always to other people or to feel that your truth is the only truth that matters. And I think a real way forward, a real humble way forward, is not to sacrifice justice in that, but to really learn to listen and be in dialogue and stay in conversation. Um, and do all of this with deep humility. So yes, I'll pray for your ministry and I'll follow your channel from now that I know of this these conversations happening. And I hope we can continue to expand our network and do this work together.
Excellent. Well, thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for being with us, and thank you for watching with us today. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you so much.
That's it.
Bye bye.